Snow had come early that year, and it hadn't taken the courtesy to leave. It clung to the earth like grief, quiet, stubborn, and cold to the touch. The wind slid across the prairie in low sighs, brushing against the shuttered windows of Elias Granger's homestead with fingers like old regret. He moved through his morning like he always did, coffee boiled black over the stove, a splash of it poured into a chipped cup, the rest left to steam beside an untouched second mug. The house was clean in a way that felt empty, not tidy. No voices echoed off the timber walls. Just the steady creak of boots and the hush of a man who didn't ask much from a day. Elias had once been a man with purpose, a husband, a soon-to-be father. But that was before the winter storm 5 years ago, the one that closed the roads and sealed the doctor away in town while his wife lay laboring through her last night on earth. The child never cried. Neither did he, not then. But something inside him had hollowed, and he hadn't tried to fill it since. By the time the noon sun slanted pale through the windows, Elias had already mended a fence and seen to the livestock. He moved slow, steady, each task a small weight that kept his hands from remembering how empty they were. He didn't notice the footprints in the snow behind the barn until later, when the chickens stirred uneasy and the dog barked once, low and uncertain. He followed the sound, hand resting near the handle of his rifle, but not drawing it. He wasn't quick to assume trouble. Trouble usually announced itself louder. The barn door groaned as he pushed it open, and the cold breathed out from the shadows. At first, he thought it was a pile of old cloths scattered near the haystack. But then the shape moved. She was curled against the stall wall, wrapped in torn skirts and a threadbare shawl. Her face was pale as wax, her lips cracked and blue at the edges. One arm was curled around her belly, round, swollen, unmistakable. The other hand gripped a rusted pitchfork like a dying prayer. He didn't speak. Not yet. She blinked up at him with the wide-eyed terror of a deer cornered in a field. When she tried to sit up, her body failed her, and she slumped back, breath rasping like wind through reeds. "You're safe," he said quietly, voice rough from disuse. "Ain't no one here but me." Her eyes darted to the open door behind him, then back to his face. She didn't answer, just held his gaze like a dare. He stepped closer, slow and deliberate. "I won't hurt you," he added, though he figured those words had been said too many times by men who didn't mean them. He crouched and reached toward her, offering his coat. She flinched. But then the cold made its argument clearer than any words could. After a long moment, she let him wrap the coat around her shoulders, and her head dropped forward like it was too heavy to hold. He gathered her into his arms carefully, like lifting something fragile left out in the frost. She was light, too light. Her skin burned through the layers with fever or hunger, or both. He carried her across the snow, with boots crunching slow and sure beneath them, her breath shallow against his chest. Inside, he stoked the fire until it glowed like an ember heart, then set her down on the old settee near it. She barely stirred, only moaned once, soft as a lost him. He brought water. She couldn't lift the cup, so he tilted it to her lips. She drank, eyes never leaving his face, not with trust, but with exhausted wariness, like a bird too tired to fly, but still watching the sky. He fetched blankets, left food where she could see it, then retreated across the room, giving her the space he guessed she hadn't been given in a long while. Outside, the wind had picked up, pressing snow against the windows like a restless spirit seeking a way in. She slept in fits. He could hear her murmuring through the night, whispers caught between dreams and fever. Names maybe, please, or just memories trying to claw their way out. He didn't sleep much. Sat by the fire sharpening his knife, watching the flames stretch and curl like dancers in red silk. From time to time, he'd glance her way, not to stare, just to make sure she was still breathing. In the pale light of morning, she stirred again. This time with a start, like waking in a world she hadn't meant to enter. Her hands went immediately to her stomach, and then to her surroundings. She tried to rise, legs wobbling, fear rising like a tide. "Wait," he said softly, holding out a hand but not reaching. "You're not trapped. You're not chased. You're just here." She froze mid-motion. looked at him like she was trying to decide if he was real. "I ain't got much," he continued, "but what I have's yours until you're strong enough to walk away. You can leave. Or you can rest. Either way, I'll not bother you." Her throat worked like she wanted to speak, but hadn't used the muscles in too long. "I'm Elias," he offered, filling the quiet. "Granger. Just me here since." He stopped. Didn't finish. Let the words die like they often did. She looked around the room then. Her eyes paused on the second coffee mug, still sitting cold and untouched from the morning before. Then she nodded once. Just once. But it felt like a door creaked open on its hinges. He turned back toward the fire and didn't press her for more. Didn't ask her name. Didn't ask about the baby or where she'd come from. If she wanted to tell him, she would. If not, that was hers to keep. He heard the soft rustle of blankets as she adjusted, heard her settle more deeply into the couch. A tentative surrender. Outside, the wind had calmed. The storm had passed for now. But inside that house, something new had begun to take root, uncertain, unspoken, and flickering like flame light on old wood. Elias didn't know what she would be to him. Didn't know if she would stay, or if the thaw would carry her off like so many other things the world had taken. But for now, there was breath in the room that wasn't his. And in a house built from silence, that alone felt like the start of something. And so he let the fire burn low and waited for morning. As the snow finally softened against the windows, and the ghosts in the barn gave way to the sound of a woman sleeping, warm at last. The days that followed fell into a rhythm, quiet as snow melt and just as slow. She stayed in the house, never straying beyond the porch, watching the land as if expecting it to rise up and swallow her whole. Her presence was light, careful, like a ghost uncertain if she was welcome in the world of the living. Elias didn't speak unless he had to. He gave her space, but not distance. Left warm bread on the table, stew simmering on the stove. Repaired her shawl without a word, sewing each stitch with the same care he gave his fence posts. She never thanked him, but once he caught her fingers lingering over the new seams. That was enough. She moved like someone trained to be invisible, steps light, gaze always scanning the doorways, shoulders tense like a question with no answer. Her hair, once tangled with burrs and dirt, he noticed, had been combed, tied back with a piece of twine. Her face, though gaunt, had started to show color again. He'd ask simple things. Did she want more food? Did she need anything from town? She'd nod or shake her head. Nothing more. But her eyes held thunder and old pain, like someone who had been screaming inside for years. Once, he came in from the barn and found her near the hearth, arms wrapped around her belly. She wasn't crying, but there was a stillness to her, like a lake just before it freezes. "I can't stay long," she murmured, the word scratchy with disuse. He didn't answer right away, just took off his coat and hung it by the fire. "Then stay as long as you need." She looked at him then, truly looked, as if trying to see what lay beneath the quiet. Whatever she saw, it made her stay a little longer that day, and the day after that. By the end of the week, she'd started setting the table before he came in from chores, folding the napkins with delicate precision. Once he watched her run her hand along the edge of a teacup, as if it reminded her of something gentler, somewhere else. Her hands were skilled, the kind that had once done fine work, not ranch work, not survival. He found himself wondering about her story, but never asked. She seemed like someone who'd been asked too many questions with fists instead of words. One afternoon, he came in from the fields early. The wind had picked up, chasing sharp gusts across the plains. Inside, the house was warm, smelled of stew again, this time with a hint of herbs he didn't recall owning. She was at the stove, back to him. He paused in the doorway, not wanting to startle her. She turned, eyes wide. Then, seeing it was him, she relaxed. A fraction. "I used to cook for a house with 20 mouths," she said softly. "This feels strange. Quiet." "Quiet suits me," Elias replied. "But I don't mind the smell of rosemary." Something about that made her smile. Just barely. But it was the kind of smile that came from remembering who you used to be. That night, the snow came again. Not heavy, but steady. She stood by the window, watching it fall. He brought her a blanket and sat near the fire, not too close. She didn't turn from the window. "My name's Ayana," she said finally, voice so soft it almost got lost in the crackle of flame. Elias didn't move. "Ayana," he repeated, letting it settle between them like something sacred. "That's a good name." She didn't tell him more. Not then. But it was the first brick in a wall being taken down. Days passed, and spring crept closer. The snow began to recede in patches, revealing mud and dead grass beneath. He caught her outside once, sitting on the porch steps, face tilted toward the weak sun. The wind played with her skirts. Her hands rested on her belly, as if the child inside had stirred, reminding her he, or she, was still coming, no matter what the world did. "I didn't think we'd make it this far," she said, not looking at him. "You have," Elias said. "You're here." She turned to him slowly. "For now." He didn't press, just nodded. That evening, she left a folded shirt on his chair, his mended neatly at the sleeve. She'd sewn it without asking. He put it on the next day without comment. One morning, she woke in a sweat, hand clutched to her side. He heard her from the next room. Came running, heart thudding. She waved him off, pale and shaking. "It's just the baby," she said, breathless. Stretching. "Feels like she's fighting." "She?" Elias asked gently. She touched her belly with something like awe. "It's just a feeling." He brought her water, sat beside the bed until her breathing evened. "Wherever she ends up," Ayana whispered, eyes barely open, "I hope it's somewhere quiet. Somewhere kind." Elias watched her drift off, wondering if she knew she'd already found such a place. Later that week, while he was tending the animals, she came to the barn. First time. Stood in the doorway, like someone crossing into a memory. He looked up, surprised but careful not to show it. "I've never seen a man talk to his horse like that," she said. Elias gave a quiet shrug. "Animals listen better than most folks." She stepped inside, resting a hand on a post. Her fingers traced the grain of the wood. "This barn saved my life." He looked around, as if seeing it fresh. It'd seen death too. Long time ago. She turned her face toward him. "Your wife." He nodded once. "And the boy." Neither of them made it. The silence after was thick, but not heavy. "I'm sorry," she said. "Wasn't your fault." "I know." They stood like that for a while, two people tied together not by blood or fate, but by the soft, stubborn will to keep breathing after everything else has gone quiet. That night, she sat at the fire again. A soft storm tapped at the windows. Elias poured her a mug of tea, handed it over. She didn't flinch this time. "I left a man," she said. "Not the father. Just the last one who thought he could own me." Elias didn't react. Just let her speak. He said no one else would take me in. That a woman carrying someone else's burden ought to be grateful. She stared into the tea. He was wrong. But it took me too long to know it. "You were never the burden," Elias said simply. She looked up at him. Her eyes filled with something sharp, like grief laced with gratitude. He didn't break the gaze. Didn't offer to fix it, or her. Just let the words hang there between them. After a long moment, she set the mug down. "I think I'll stay a little longer." "All right. I can't promise much." "Don't need much." She smiled again, fuller this time. Then leaned back, watching the fire with new steadiness. Outside, the wind began to calm. Inside, the air between them softened, thick with the kind of silence that heals rather than harms. And though neither said it aloud, something had shifted. Not enough to call it hope. Not yet. But perhaps the start of it. A seed nestled deep beneath the snow, waiting for spring. The land was beginning to breathe again. The snow didn't vanish all at once. It retreated slowly, curling back into the shadowed hollows and fence corners like it had grown tired of staying. Shoots of green pushed through the thawed earth, tentative and brave. The wind softened its voice. Birds returned in pairs, calling out from the eaves like they remembered how to belong here. Inside the house, a different thaw was taking place. Ayana moved with more certainty now. Her limbs no longer trembled beneath the weight of the child inside her. Her face, though still thin, had the glow of someone fed, rested, seen. She'd begun humming while she worked, quiet little threads of tune that disappeared as soon as Elias entered the room, like she was still unsure whether joy was something she was allowed to claim out loud. Elias noticed everything. He noticed how she folded laundry with careful corners, how she stopped to smell the soap when washing dishes, how she paused each morning at the window, tracing the horizon with her eyes like she was searching for ghosts. He never asked about her past again, but she started telling him anyway, not all at once, but in pieces scattered across days like breadcrumbs. Her father had died when she was small. Her mother, hard-handed and God-fearing, had remarried a man who didn't like noise or hunger or girls with minds of their own. Ayanna had learned to be small, silent, agreeable. When she turned 16, the preacher's wife took her in, taught her embroidery, how to boil down nettles for tea, how to stand up straight even when her heart caved in. That woman died 3 winters later, and Ayanna was passed along again, like a borrowed pot or a stray dog. "I was always something someone tolerated," she said one night, sewing by the fire. "Never something someone chose." Elias looked up from the boot he was mending. "That's a cruel way to live." She didn't argue. In return, Elias told her about the orchard he once planned to build for his wife. Rows of apple trees behind the barn, so she could pick fruit with the baby on her hip and flower on her cheek. He'd dug 6 holes before the storm came. Now they were just small sunken circles in the earth, half forgotten. She listened, eyes soft. "Did you name the boy?" He nodded. "Matthew." "Mine might be a girl," she said, "but I think I'll wait until I see her face." He smiled at that. A real one. It changed his whole face, made him look younger, less weathered by sorrow. The next morning, she was sitting by the hearth, fingers resting lightly on her belly. She looked up at Elias and asked without ceremony, "Do you believe people can change?" He thought for a while before answering. "I think some people were always good, just got buried under too much hurt." Ayanna nodded. "Maybe that's true." She started coming with him to the barn, feeding the hens, brushing down the mare. He showed her how to check the fencing, how to lift a shovel without straining. She learned quickly, with quiet determination. One day, she returned from the garden with her skirts dusted in dirt and cheeks flushed from bending in the sun. Elias had never seen her look more alive. Later, he found her sitting on the porch steps, rubbing her lower back. "She's heavy today," Ayanna said, smiling faintly. "She's strong," Elias said, taking a seat beside her. They sat in silence, watching the sky blush gold at the edges. The wind lifted her hair, and for a moment, she leaned her head against his shoulder. Not a duionation, not a promise. Just a small gesture of trust. He didn't move. That night, he took the wood he'd been storing in the shed and began building a cradle. He didn't tell her. Worked on it in the barn under lamplight, sanding each edge smooth, fitting the joints with more care than he'd given anything in years. He wasn't sure why he did it. Maybe because his hands needed something to offer. Maybe because her child was becoming a quiet part of his days. Maybe because he'd begun imagining the sound of a baby's cry in the house, and it no longer frightened him. One morning, Ayanna found him hunched over the half-finished cradle. She stood in the doorway, without speaking, arms crossed loosely over her chest. He looked up, sheepish. "It's not perfect," he said, "but it's solid." Ayanna walked in, fingers trailing along the curve of the wood. Her throat moved like she was swallowing something heavy. "No one's ever made anything for me before," she said. Elias looked away. "It's not just for you." "I know," she whispered. Spring poured in slow, filling the house with new light. The curtains fluttered like breath. The old boards creaked differently now, as if shifting to make room for what was coming. Sometimes Ayanna would wake from dreams, startled and breathless. Elias heard her through the wall. He never went to her room, never pried. But the next morning, her tea would be waiting. A slice of bread thick, with honey, beside it. She never asked how he knew, but she always ate. One afternoon, the clouds rolled in thick and low. The air turned metallic. Elias was out back, pulling feed sacks into the shed when he saw Ayanna sitting in the rocking chair, one hand resting on her belly, the other holding a folded piece of paper. She didn't see him watching. Later that evening, by the fire, she handed him the note. "I started writing letters," she said. "Not to anyone really. Just to the parts of me that need to hear things." He took the paper carefully. Didn't open it. Just nodded. "I never thought I'd feel safe again," she said. "Not really." "You are," Elias replied. "And not just here. With me." Ayana's eyes shone. Not with tears. With something steadier. Stronger. That night, they didn't speak much. Just sat beside each other while the storm tapped gently at the windows, and the hearth crackled warm between them. The baby kicked once, strong enough to make Ayana laugh out loud. Elias looked over in surprise and found himself smiling without meaning to. He didn't reach for her hand, didn't say the things he'd begun to feel, but he stayed beside her, breathing in the scent of lavender and wood smoke, watching the fire flicker across the cradle they'd both come to believe in. Outside, the trees swayed and sighed. Inside, two lives leaned quietly toward each other, neither needing to be rescued, only seen. And just beneath the silence, something sacred stirred, waiting, patient, ready to bloom. The knock came just after midday, when the sun was high and mean, and Ayana was shelling peas by the open window. Elias was outside, mending the gate where the hinge had rusted through. The sound was sharp, 3 crisp raps against the wood, like a judge calling court. Ayana stilled. The pea fell from her fingers and rolled across the floor. She hadn't heard a knock in weeks. Folks didn't come out this far unless they meant something. She stood slowly, hands brushing over her belly, as if the baby might still the world with her. The door creaked as she opened it. A man stood on the porch, dust-covered and lean, his hat tilted back just enough to show a crooked smile beneath mean eyes. "Well, B," he drawled, eyes sweeping over her like a brand. "Didn't expect you'd land so soft." Ayana didn't speak, her body locked up like a door bolted tight. Elias came around the corner then, wiping his hands on a rag, his eyes narrowing the moment he saw the man. He moved to Ayana's side without a word. The stranger gave a lopsided grin. "Name's Roy Dalton. I'm here for what's mine." Ayana flinched. Elias didn't. "She's not yours," Elias said, voice low. Roy's eyes flicked between them. "She's carrying my blood. Left without a word in the middle of the night, like some thief. That child's mine, and I aim to take her back." Ayana's voice came sharp, brittle. "You left me to rot, Roy. That child isn't yours. You said as much." He smirked. "Didn't say I wanted it, no. But the law might see things different. Pregnant girl running cross-country alone. Sounds suspicious to most folks." Elias stepped forward. Not aggressive, just steady. "This land's mine. This house is mine. The sheriff knows it. You want trouble, you'll find it. Otherwise, turn around and keep riding." Roy stared a moment longer, then spat off the side of the porch. "This ain't over. She don't belong here." Ayana raised her chin. "You're right. I belong nowhere that forgets I'm human." Roy laughed once, bitter and loud. "Heard you were staying with a preacher's widow. Guess she didn't teach you humility." "She taught me not to mistake cruelty for strength," Ayana said. Roy's grin faltered just slightly. He tipped his hat, mockery gleaming in every movement. "We'll see how long this fairy tale lasts. Wind always changes." He turned and strode back to his horse, boots kicking up dust. Rode off slow, like a man who wanted to be remembered. Elias waited until the sound of hooves faded. Then he looked to Ayana, who was staring at the road like she could burn it into ash with her eyes. "You all right?" he asked. She shook her head. "I don't think I've ever been so afraid and so sure at the same time." "He can't hurt you here," Elias said. "But he can try." Her voice broke, not from fear, but fury. They didn't sleep that night. Ayana kept to the rocking chair by the fire, arms wrapped around her belly. Elias sat across from her, cleaning his rifle with slow, deliberate care. The sound of metal and cloth filled the space between them. "I thought I was done running," Ayana said into the quiet. "I thought I could stop flinching at shadows." "You can," Elias replied. "It just takes time." The next morning, Sheriff McCall rode up the lane. A broad man with a weathered face and a heart slower than most, but solid. He stepped off his horse with a frown. Heard Roy Dalton was poking around, he said. Says you're harboring his wife. I'm not his anything, Ayanna said, stepping outside before Elias could respond. McCall nodded once, respectful. You say that plain enough, and I'll write it up just so. I say it plain. I say it under oath. That man never laid a finger in kindness. Only in ownership. He's no father, no husband, just a bitter man who doesn't like being told no. Elias watched the sheriff carefully. He knew the kind of men the law sometimes bent toward. But McCall just sighed. Far as I'm concerned, this land is Granger's. You're staying here of your own will. Ain't a court west of the river would say otherwise. Then we're done here, Elias said. Almost. McCall glanced toward Ayanna. You want me to have a deputy keep watch for a spell? She hesitated, then shook her head. If he comes back, I'd rather see it with my own eyes. The sheriff tipped his hat. You're brave, miss. No, she said softly. I'm tired. That night, Elias sat beside her again, the fire flickering low. He wanted to reach for her hand, to say something that could chase away the past like smoke. But instead, he said the only thing that mattered. If he comes back, I won't let him near you. Ayanna turned to him, eyes shining, not with tears, but with something clearer. I believe you, she said. Days passed. Roy didn't return, but the fear lingered like smoke in the corners of the room. Ayanna jumped at sudden noises, slept light, but slowly she began to root herself again, into the land, into the house, into them. One morning, she came in from the barn with a full pail of milk and mud on her boots. She was smiling. I felt her hiccup, she said, laughter spilling into the room, like she's already arguing with the world. Elias grinned. She gets that honest. That night, the sky cracked open with a storm. Lightning lit the horizon in jagged bursts. Thunder rolled low and deep. Ayanna couldn't sleep. She wandered the house like a woman searching for something that wasn't lost anymore. She ended up in the kitchen, one hand resting on the counter, the other on her belly. Elias came in quietly, offered her tea. I was afraid he'd take this away, she said. Not just the baby. All of it. The porch. The cradle. You. He can't, Elias said. Because you're not his to take. She looked up then, and for the first time, she saw not the widower who kept the shadows, but a man standing firm in the light of something he hadn't dared believe in for years. Neither are you, she whispered. Elias tilted his head. What do you mean? She stepped closer. You don't belong to your grief anymore. You don't have to. And just like that, something broke open between them, quiet and fierce. Not a kiss. Not even a touch. Just two people standing in the middle of a storm, finally seeing the shelter they'd built in each other. Outside, the thunder rumbled on. But inside, the air had changed. The wind might still turn, but they were no longer bracing for it alone. The labor began in the deepest part of night, when the wind outside had stilled and even the wolves had gone quiet. Ayanna woke with a sharp cry caught in her throat, the kind that wasn't fear, but the body's ancient memory flaring to life. Pain radiated low and deep, twisting her from sleep into something new and primal. The fire had burned down to embers. She sat upright, hand clutching her belly. Another wave came, and she pressed her teeth together until it passed, breathing hard into the darkness. Elias heard her before she called. He was already rising, already pulling on boots, moving toward her room with a steadiness that steadied her. She looked up as he stepped inside, face shadowed but calm. It's time, she whispered. He only nodded. Let's get you to the fire. She leaned on him as they crossed the room. No shame, no hesitation. Every step was harder than the last, her breath hitching, the pain coming faster now, a drumbeat rising from the ground. He helped her into the old rocking chair, the one she'd claimed months ago, the one that had waited longer than either of them had known. The fire roared again by his hand, coaxed to life with practiced fingers. He laid out towels, boiled water. He didn't speak unless she needed him to. He didn't hover. He simply stayed, solid and sure, like a tree that would not fall. Outside, snow had started again, fine, glittering flakes in the darkness, as if the sky wanted to bless the moment without disturbing it. Ayana labored through the night, with grit carved from years of surviving things worse than this. But this was still hard, harder than she'd imagined. She screamed once, wild and sharp, and Elias came to her side without flinching, hand resting on her shoulder. Not to hold her still, just to say, "I'm here." "I'm scared," she breathed. Not of the pain, of what comes after. He met her eyes. "You've already walked through worse. And you're still here." Tears spilled from her, sudden and clean. Not from sorrow, but the terrible, beautiful weight of being believed in. The final hours blurred. Blood, sweat, breath, the scent of iron and smoke. Her body fought and yielded and fought again. And when dawn cracked the sky open with its first blue light, when the snow lit gold in the rising sun, the child came. A girl, small, damp with life, red-faced and furious. Ayana wept like the land does after a long drought, helplessly and without shame. She held the baby to her chest, skin to skin, tears soaking the crown of dark hair. Elias knelt beside her, breath caught in his chest, watching with awe that didn't need words. He hadn't touched the child, hadn't yet asked to, but his eyes were full. "She's strong," Ayana whispered. "She came roaring." "She gets that from her mother," Elias said softly. Ayana looked at him then, exhaustion and love and wonder braided into her face. "Do you want to hold her?" He hesitated, as if afraid he'd shatter the moment just by moving. But she nodded, already lifting the child toward him. His hands were gentle, cradling her like something sacred. The child blinked at him, scrunching her face into something close to fury, then settled with a sigh. He rocked slowly, rhythm drawn from some memory he hadn't known he'd kept. "She's heavier than she looks," he murmured. "She's made of everything I couldn't say," Ayana replied. When he handed her back, he didn't let go right away. His fingers lingered a moment too long. Not possessive, just reluctant. Later that day, Ayana slept, curled with the baby on her chest, breathing deep. Her body was wrung out, but her face was soft, and the quiet wasn't heavy anymore. It was full. Elias stepped out onto the porch, the wind brushing his face like a friend come home. He looked out over the land, bare trees, fields wet with thaw, sky streaked with the early blush of spring. And he thought of all the years he'd spent waiting for something he couldn't name. He didn't hear the rider until the horse was nearly at the gate. Roy. He hadn't come with a lawman, hadn't come with paperwork or argument, just a pistol at his hip and the stink of a man with nothing left to lose. Elias stepped down from a porch before Roy could dismount. Their eyes met and time bent. "She had the baby," Roy said, voice flat. "I came to see what's mine." "She's not yours," Elias said. His voice was steady, final. Roy dismounted slowly, letting his hand rest near the pistol grip. "You think she'd pick you? Some dried-up farmer hiding in the hills?" "She didn't pick me. She chose peace." Roy laughed, bitter and empty. "You think peace lasts? You think she won't need more than what you are?" Elias didn't answer. He didn't have to. Roy stepped closer, hand twitching. Elias's shotgun was in the crook of his arm, the way a man might carry a cane or a shovel. He didn't raise it, just stood his ground. Inside, Ayana stirred. She came to the doorway, the baby wrapped against her chest. Her eyes locked on Roy. "No more," she said, voice loud enough to cut the wind. "You don't get to haunt me." Roy faltered. Just a flicker, but it was there. A crack. "She's mine by blood," he said. "You didn't bleed for her," Ayana replied. "You didn't ache and stretch and break. You didn't stay up through storms or kneel at the cradle. You didn't wait or wonder or love." Roy looked at Elias. "And he did." "No," she said. "He didn't love me out loud. But he saw me. He stayed. That's more than you ever did." Roy's eyes dropped. For a long moment, he said nothing. Then, without ceremony, he turned, mounted his horse, and rode away. No threat, no fight, just a man who'd finally realized he had no power left. Ayana leaned against the doorway, trembling. Elias went to her side. For the first time, he reached for her hand. She took it. And in that quiet, snow-blushed morning, they stood as three, a mother, a child, and a man who had once lost everything and found, in return, a life no longer marked by silence, but by choice. Later, when the fire had been stoked again and the sun had climbed fully into the sky, Ayana sat beside Elias with a baby sleeping in her arms. The cradle he built waited nearby, half in shadow, half in light. "You never asked what her name was," Ayana said. "I figured you'd tell me when it was time." She smiled. "Her name is Hope." He nodded slowly. "That's a good name." They sat that way for a long while, saying nothing more. Because sometimes the truth didn't need telling. It just needed living. And in the quiet of that cabin, with a firelight dancing and a new day laid out before them, hope wasn't a word anymore. It was a breath, a bond, a beginning. And it had come roaring into the world.